This revenge story contains intense acts of retribution that may be excessive and could be disturbing to some viewers.
I never thought my life would spiral into this. My name is Jack Shephard, and I'm a 30-year-old doctor living in Los Angeles. My wife, Kate, is a 28-year-old former model turned real estate agent. We were the picture-perfect couple, beautiful, successful, and seemingly in love. But beneath the surface, our marriage was crumbling, and I was about to discover a betrayal that would shatter everything I thought I knew. It all started innocently enough. Kate and I met through mutual friends at a charity gala. She was radiant, her laughter filling the room as she charmed everyone around her. I was drawn to her immediately, and within months, we were inseparable. Our wedding was a fairy tale, white roses, a beachfront ceremony, and vows that felt unbreakable. For a while, life was perfect, but after we got married, things began to change. Kate started coming home late, claiming she had work dinners or meetings with clients. At first, I trusted her. She was ambitious, and I admired that about her, but then the lies became more frequent. She'd forget our plans, cancel last minute, or come home smelling of alcohol and perfume that wasn't hers. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overthinking, but deep down I knew something was wrong. One night, Kate told me she had drinks with her boss and left in a hurry. Something about her tone felt off. She didn't kiss me goodbye like she usually did, and her eyes avoided mine. I sat on the couch, staring at the clock as the hours ticked by. When she finally came home, her makeup was smudged and her hair was disheveled. "Long night," she muttered, heading straight to the shower without another word. The next morning, I tried to broach the subject. "How was last night?" I asked casually over breakfast. She froze for a split second, her fork hovering over her plate. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "Just work stuff." I wanted to believe her, but the way she avoided my gaze made my stomach churn. Later that day, I noticed her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen. I'd never been the type to snoop, but the nagging doubt in my mind was too loud to ignore. Before I could unlock it, Kate appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with panic. "What are you doing?" she snapped, snatching the phone from my hand. "It's private, Jack." Her reaction was like a punch to the gut. I wanted to confront her, to demand the truth, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded and walked away, my mind racing. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Kate slept soundly beside me. The woman I loved felt like a stranger, and I didn't know how to fix it. The days that followed were a blur. Kate's excuses became more elaborate: sudden overtime, weekend work emergencies, and late-night client calls. Each lie felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her. I was afraid of what I might find out, afraid that the life we'd built together was nothing but a facade. Looking back, I should have seen the signs sooner. The way she'd flinch when I touched her, the way she'd disappear for hours without explanation. But I was blind, clinging to the hope that everything was fine. Little did I know, the storm was already brewing, and it would soon destroy everything in its path. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Kate's behavior had become too erratic to ignore, and the weight of my suspicions was crushing me. Every time I tried to talk to her, she'd deflect or shut down, leaving me more frustrated and confused. I needed answers, but I didn't know where to start. One evening, after another late-night work meeting, I called my best friend Aaron. We'd known each other since med school, and he'd always been the voice of reason in my life. "I think Kate's cheating on me," I blurted out as soon as he picked up. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. "I mean, have you actually seen anything?" "Not exactly," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. But she's been lying to me, Aaron. I can feel it. He sighed, and I could almost hear him weighing his words. Look, if you really think something's going on, you need to know for sure. Otherwise, you're just going to drive yourself crazy. That's when he suggested hiring a private investigator. At first, I balked at the idea. It felt invasive, like I was crossing a line I couldn't come back from. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't have a choice. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, wondering if the woman I loved was betraying me. The investigator's name was Marcus, a no-nonsense guy in his late 40s with a reputation for discretion. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and I handed him a folder with everything I knew about Kate's schedule, her phone number, and the names of her coworkers. I just need to know the truth, I told him, my voice trembling. He nodded, his expression unreadable. I'll take care of it. The next few days were agony. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would leap into my throat, fearing it was Marcus with news I didn't want to hear. I tried to act normal around Kate, but it was getting harder to pretend. She'd come home late, her clothes smelling of cigarette smoke and cologne, and I'd bite my tongue to keep from screaming. Finally, a week later, Marcus called. I've got something, he said, his tone grim. Can you meet me? My hands shook as I drove to his office, my mind racing with possibilities. When I walked in, he handed me a manila envelope without a word. Inside were photos, dozens of them. The first one was of Kate, and a man I didn't recognize. They were sitting at a bar, her hand resting on his arm as she laughed at something he'd said. The next photo showed them leaving together, his arm around her waist. My stomach churned as I flipped through the rest. Kate kissing him in a parked car. Kate sneaking into a motel with another man entirely. Who are they? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus pointed to the first man. That's Sawyer, construction worker, 40 years old. He tapped the second photo. And that's Desmond. Works in finance, 35. Both of them have been seeing her for months. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. 2 men. She'd been lying to me, sneaking around with not one but 2 other men. The photos blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I forced myself to keep looking. I needed to see it all, needed to make it real. The days after I found the photos were a blur. I moved into the guest room, unable to sleep next to Kate, and we moved around the house like ghosts, avoiding each other as much as possible. The silence between us was deafening, filled with all the things we weren't saying. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I needed answers, even if they destroyed me. One night, after Kate came home late yet again, I finally snapped. She was in the kitchen pouring herself a glass of wine when I walked in and dropped the envelope of photos on the counter. We need to talk, I said, my voice low and steady. She froze, her back to me, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then she turned around, her face pale as she stared at the envelope. What's this? She asked, though I could tell she already knew. Open it, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. She hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for the envelope. When she pulled out the photos, her breath caught, and she sank into a chair, her eyes wide with shock. Jack, she started, but I cut her off. Don't, I said, my voice rising. Don't try to explain this away. I want the truth, Kate. All of it. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, but I felt nothing. Not sympathy, not anger, just a hollow emptiness. It started with Sawyer, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was just there. He made me feel wanted, and I was so lonely. You were always working, and I felt like I didn't matter to you anymore. Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. And Desmond? I asked, my tone icy. She flinched, looking down at her hands. That was later. I didn't mean for it to happen, but what, Kate? I snapped, slamming my hand on the counter. You didn't mean to sleep with 2 different men? You didn't mean to lie to me for months? She flinched again, her tears falling faster. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice breaking. You destroyed everything. Our marriage, our life together. It's all a lie. She didn't respond, just sat there crying, and I felt a surge of anger so intense it scared me. How could you do this to me? I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. I loved you, Kate. I trusted you. And you threw it all away. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with pain, but I didn't care. I want a divorce, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. She gasped, shaking her head. No, Jack, please. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. It's too late for that, I said, turning away. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. She reached for me, her hand brushing my arm, but I jerked away. Don't touch me, I said, my voice cold. I can't even look at you right now. She started to cry harder, her sobs filling the room, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I couldn't. I walked out of the kitchen and into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay in that house, not with her. As I drove through the empty streets, my mind raced. How had it come to this? We were supposed to be happy, supposed to have a life together. But now, all I felt was anger and betrayal. I didn't know what to do next. But one thing was clear, I couldn't go back to the way things were. When I finally returned home, Kate was gone. She left a note on the counter, her handwriting shaky. I'm staying at a motel. I'm so sorry, Jack. Please don't hate me. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions I couldn't even name. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything that had happened. The photos, the confrontation, the look on Kate's face when I told her I wanted a divorce. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. My life would never be the same. The days after the confrontation were a blur. Kate had moved into a motel, and I was left alone in the house we once shared. The silence was suffocating, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the photos, to Kate's tearful confession, to the hollow ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. Then, one night, everything changed. I was sitting on the couch, staring at the television without really watching it, when my phone rang. It was late, and the number was unfamiliar. I hesitated before answering, a sense of dread settling in my stomach. Hello? Is this Jack Shephard? A voice asked, tense and urgent. Yes, I said, my heart starting to race. Who is this? This is Officer Daniels with the LAPD. There's been a fire at the Sunset Motel. Your wife, Kate Austin, was injured. She's being taken to St. Vincent's Hospital. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Is she okay? I asked, my voice shaking. She's alive, the officer said, but she's in bad shape. You should get here as soon as possible. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. My hands were clenched so tightly on the steering wheel that my knuckles turned white, and my mind was racing with 1,000 terrible possibilities. When I arrived, the emergency room was chaos, nurses rushing back and forth, monitors beeping, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. I found Kate in a curtained-off area, her face pale and bandaged, an IV in her arm. She looked so small, so fragile, lying there in the hospital bed. For a moment, all my anger and betrayal melted away, replaced by a wave of guilt and fear. Kate, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned her head slowly, her eyes glassy with pain and medication. Jack, she croaked, her voice hoarse. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why she'd put us in this situation, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. What happened? I asked. Before she could answer, a nurse stepped in, her expression grim. Mr. Shephard, your wife suffered severe burns in the fire. She's stable now, but she's going to need a lot of care. I nodded, my mind reeling. Can I stay with her? For now, the nurse said, glancing at Kate, but she needs rest. As the nurse left, I turned back to Kate. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, and I felt a surge of protectiveness I hadn't expected. Despite everything, she was still my wife, and seeing her like this broke something inside me. Then, the curtain was yanked aside, and two men walked in, Sawyer and Desmond. Sawyer's face was twisted into a smirk, and Desmond looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. Well, well, Sawyer said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Look who's here, the devoted husband. I stood up, my fists clenched. What the hell are you doing here? Sawyer shrugged, glancing at Kate. Just wanted to see how she's doing. Looks like she's not so pretty anymore, huh? Something inside me snapped. I grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. You son of a bitch, I snarled. You think this is funny? She could have died? Desmond stepped forward, trying to pull me off, but I shoved him away. Stay out of this, I growled. Kate's voice cut through the tension, weak but sharp. Stop it, she said, her eyes fluttering open. Just stop. I let go of Sawyer, stepping back, my chest heaving. He straightened his shirt, glaring at me. You're a real piece of work, you know that? He said before storming out. Desmond lingered for a moment, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe, or regret. Then he followed Sawyer, leaving me alone with Kate. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I didn't know what to say. I sat down beside her, taking her hand in mine. Just rest, I said softly. We'll figure this out later. But as I sat there, watching her drift off to sleep, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The fire at the motel was the breaking point. Seeing Kate bandaged and broken, hearing Sawyer's cruel laughter, feeling Desmond's silent guilt, it all fueled something dark inside me. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let them go. They had taken everything from me, and now it was my turn to take something from them. I reached out to Tom Fletcher, a man I'd met through a patient years ago. Tom wasn't the kind of guy you called for favors unless you were prepared to cross a line. But I was past caring about lines. I need your help, I said when he answered the phone. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. What kind of help? The kind that doesn't leave a paper trail, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Tom agreed to meet me at an abandoned auto repair shop on the outskirts of the city. The place was a graveyard of rusted cars and broken machinery, the perfect setting for what I had planned. It took a week to set everything up. Tom provided the manpower, 2 guys who didn't ask questions, and I provided the targets. Sawyer was easy, he was predictable, always stopping at the same dive bar after work. Desmond was harder, but a little digging revealed his routine. And Kate, well, she was still in the hospital, vulnerable and alone. The night of the abduction, I waited in the shadows of the repair shop, my heart pounding in my chest. Tom's guys brought them in one by one, blindfolded and bound. Sawyer was the first, cursing and struggling as they dragged him inside. Desmond was next, his face pale with fear. And finally, Kate, still weak from her injuries, her eyes wide with confusion and terror. When the blindfolds came off, the room was silent, except for the sound of their ragged breathing. Sawyer was the first to speak. What the hell is this? He demanded, his voice shaking with anger. I stepped into the light, my face calm but my hands trembling. This, I said, is justice. Kate's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with. But then her expression hardened, and she looked away. Jack, what are you doing? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I should have done a long time ago," I said, my tone cold. I turned to Sawyer and Desmond, their faces pale with fear. "You thought you could take what was mine and walk away, but you were wrong." Sawyer laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You're out of your mind, Shephard. You think this changes anything? She's still a liar and you're still a fool." I didn't respond. Instead, I nodded to Tom's guys and they dragged Sawyer to the center of the room, tying him to a chair. Desmond tried to protest, but a sharp blow to the stomach silenced him. Kate watched in horror, her hands trembling as she clutched the edges of her hospital gown. "Let's play a game," I said, my voice echoing through the empty shop. I walked over to a nearby table where a set of tools lay neatly arranged. "You've taken so much from me, now it's my turn to take something from you." Sawyer's bravado faltered as I picked up a pair of pliers, his eyes widening in fear. "You're crazy," he said, his voice shaking. "You're not going to get away with this." "Maybe not," I said, leaning in close. "But you're not going to get away either." The next few hours were a blur. I won't go into the details. Some things are better left unsaid. But by the end of it, Sawyer was broken, his cocky smirk replaced by a look of pure terror. Desmond begged for mercy, his voice cracking as he promised to leave town and never come back. And Kate just sat there, her eyes hollow, her face pale. When it was over, I stood in the center of the room, my hands stained with blood and my heart pounding in my chest. "This isn't over," I said, my voice low and steady. "Not yet." I turned to Tom, who had been watching silently from the corner. "Take them to the crane," I said, nodding toward the massive machine in the back of the shop. Tom's guys dragged Sawyer and Desmond to their feet, their legs barely able to support them. Kate followed silently, her eyes fixed on the ground. The crane was old and rusted, its hook dangling ominously above the concrete floor. I explained the rules of the game. They would take turns holding onto the hook, and the last one standing would be set free. But there was a catch. Whoever survived would owe me a debt, one they could never repay. Sawyer went first, his hands trembling as he gripped the hook. He lasted longer than I expected, his stubborn pride keeping him going even as his strength failed. But eventually he let go, his body falling onto a pile of jagged metal below. Desmond was next, his face pale with fear as he took Sawyer's place. He didn't last long, his grip slipping almost immediately. His scream echoed through the shop as he fell, and I felt a pang of guilt that I quickly pushed aside. Finally, it was Kate's turn. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Do it," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the controls. For a moment, I saw the woman I'd loved, the life we'd built together. But then I remembered the photos, the lies, the betrayal. And I pressed the button. Kate held on longer than I expected, her hands gripping the hook with a strength I didn't know she had. But eventually, her strength gave out, and she fell to the ground, her body crumpling in a heap. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, as Tom's guys untied her and carried her out of the shop. She was alive, but barely. And as I watched them drive away, I knew that this was the end for her, for me, for everything we'd once had. I stood in the empty auto repair shop, the silence deafening. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smell of rust. My hands were still trembling, my clothes stained with sweat and grime. The weight of what I'd done pressed down on me like a physical force, but I couldn't bring myself to feel regret, not yet. Tom's guys had taken Kate away, leaving me alone in the dimly lit space. I walked over to the crane, its hook still swaying slightly from the weight it had borne. The floor beneath it was littered with debris, broken tools, scraps of metal, and the faint, dark stains of what had happened here. I knelt down, running my fingers over the cold concrete, and for the first time, the reality of it all hit me. I had crossed a line? No, I had obliterated it. The man I used to be, the doctor who swore to do no harm, the husband who believed in love and trust, was gone. In his place was someone I barely recognized, someone capable of unspeakable things. I sat down on the floor, my back against the wall, and let out a shaky breath. My mind raced with images of the night, Sawyer's defiant smirk crumbling into fear, Desmond's desperate pleas for mercy, Kate's hollow eyes as she clung to the hook. I had wanted revenge, and I'd gotten it. But now that it was over, I felt empty. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. It was Tom. "It's done," he said when I answered. "She's at a safe house. She'll live, but she's in bad shape." "Good," I said, my voice flat. "Make sure she stays there." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You sure about this, Jack? Once you go down this road, there's no turning back." I didn't answer right away. I thought about Kate, about the life we'd built together and the lies that had destroyed it. I thought about Sawyer and Desmond, their broken bodies lying in the shadows. And I thought about myself, about the man I'd become. "I'm sure," I said finally. "This is who I am now." Tom sighed, but he didn't argue. "All right, I'll take care of it, but you owe me, Shephard." "I know," I said, hanging up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the bloodstains on the floor. The shop was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights, and the stillness felt oppressive. I wanted to feel something, anger, guilt, relief, but all I felt was numb. Eventually, I stood up, my legs stiff and unsteady. I walked out of the shop, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. The stars were hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, and the streets were empty. I got into my car and drove home, my mind blank, my hands steady on the wheel. When I walked into the house, it felt colder than usual, the silence heavier. I poured myself a drink and sat down on the couch, staring at the blank television screen. The weight of the night pressed down on me, but I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just sat there, sipping my drink, and waited for the numbness to fade. It never did. Months later, I received a letter from Tom Fletcher. It was brief, just a few lines scrawled on a piece of paper. "Kate's in Europe, working off her debt. She won't be coming back." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and tucked it into the drawer of my desk. The house was quiet, the way it always was now. I'd gone back to work, back to my routine, but nothing felt the same. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow ache that never quite went away. I sat down in my chair, staring out the window at the empty street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. I thought about Kate, about the life we'd had and the life she'd chosen. I thought about Sawyer and Desmond, their faces forever frozen in my memory. And I thought about myself, about the man I'd been and the man I'd become. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there watching the shadows grow longer and wondered if I'd ever feel whole again.